Good morning, everyone. My name is Amillia Keagle, and I'm honored to share this day of hope and resilience with all of you. The second panel of the day will explore the role of youth activism in driving environmental change. Fittingly named Guardians of the Future, this panel reflects the truth that the choices we make now shape the world we live in today and tomorrow. To reshape the future, we must first rediscover our place within the world. When we uplift, honor, and learn from those who are just beginning to carve their paths, we embrace the boldest visions for what is possible. This panel features intergenerational leaders who are globally recognized for their life's work and dedication to reimagining environmental activism. Our moderator, Annette Freytag, is an award-winning scholar and professor of landscape architecture at Rutgers University. She is a co-founder of the Rutgers Air Collaborative, a community-based research initiative that promotes spatial justice through creative placemaking in New Brunswick. Through this initiative, she provides students with experiential learning opportunities that bridge scientific research with community engagement, culture, and the arts. We welcome Natalie Mebane, a sustainability and policy expert with years of experience in grassroots organizing, fundraising, and legislative advocacy. As Chief Program Director at 0 Hour, an international youth-led climate movement, Natalie is a dedicated feminist mentor who fosters shared leadership with young activists. Her work advances environmental justice and builds the political will necessary for a transition to a clean, sustainable economy. Amy and Ella Meek traveled from the United Kingdom to be with us today. In 2016, at just 10 and 12 years old, they co-founded the youth-led charity organization Kids Against Plastic to educate young people on environmental issues such as plastic pollution. Nearly a decade later, their organization continues to empower young people worldwide to take actions in their communities and beyond. Last but not least, we have Isaias Hernandez, an environmental scientist dedicated to making environmental literacy more accessible. Known online as the Queer Brown Vegan, Isaias brings intersectionality to the forefront of environmental education. Through content creation, storytelling, and public engagement, he has built a global following that has been featured in Vogue, The New York Times, The Washington Post, The Guardian, and Business Insider. He recently earned acceptance into the Masters of Climate Solutions program at UC Berkeley, where he also completed his undergraduate degree in environmental science. Congratulations, Isaias. Yeah. With that, I would like to ask our panelists to briefly describe in just about 5 minutes, one, what you do, what your organization does, what you are most proud of, and what you think we need to do more to get people's attention. Thank you.
Natalie, would you want to start us off?
Okay, I guess I sat in the first seat, so I have to start. So thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Natalie Mebane, based in Washington, D.C. It's such a hard question. I mean, I was thinking about this question today, like I tried to describe what exactly I do. So I do a variety of things. I actually also work in a variety of organizations. I would say what I really do is I help people essentially build movements. And, you know, I work with both in different organizations, 0 Hour as well as Generation Green and even a few others. And what I found is that, you know, the thing that I'm most proud of is helping people find what they're good at and then helping them build that. Helping, especially, you know, with young people. I would say, recruited, I guess, to the youth climate movement with one of the founders from 0 Hour, and I hadn't planned to be like the adult in the youth climate movement. I was a youth climate activist, and then just, you know, grew up, just got older. And I think what I have found, you know, really fulfilling working with young people is that young people have a drive and a sort of moral clarity that the world always needs. And they don't really have fear. They don't have fear of failure. They don't have fear of trying new things. They don't have fear of pushing until they win. There is no compromise. The compromise is you're saying that if either we don't make it and we fail and I don't have a life, or we do make it. It's like, well, let's gamble on making it. Let's at least try. And so what I have found is, you know, really working with young people is that they always try and they don't give up. And I think that my role within that movement, as an older person, has been to sort of help lay sort of like the yellow brick road of guidance of, okay, you care. How do you want to do this? And then showing them the different levers to pull. I think things that I'm most proud of, wow, I don't even know if I can summarize all of them. I would say it's the people I've worked with over the years. I think the things that I'm most proud of is seeing young folks that I've been able to mentor over the years. We got to see one right here. There we go. Since I know since she was a junior in high school. And to see who they've become as they've gotten older, to see who they've grown into be, and to see the amazing work that they do. It's like watching your work amplify and spread and be like, wow, okay. And you see like just folks all over the world doing great things. And the other question you mentioned was, what do we need to focus on? Sorry, that last part.
Yeah, is this on? Okay. What do you think we need to do more to get people's attention?
To get people's attention. Oh man, I think a lot of, it's interesting. I think people now are actually really, really paying attention. I think that folks know now, like the climate impacts have become so severe that it's difficult for folks to ignore it. It's kind of hard to see what has happened with, wildfires and constant floods and just everything that's happening and pretend like it's not real. When I was coming up, I know because I was born in 1985, just put my age out there. And when I was coming up, climate change was still debated as like, is it human caused? Is there climate change? It was still the whole climate denial sponsored by our fossil fuel companies. And people actually said this. Like I remember being in college. I was at the University of Maryland. People were like, in classes, were like, well, it's still up in the air. Like people, that was still like the commentary in the news. And I think that now, if you say something like that, you kind of get laughed at. It's kind of like you're still debating, like, well, Santa Claus might be real. Like you were kind of that ridiculous. And so what I have seen in the last, even just, when I was in college 20 years ago when I was in school, is that now no one's debating it. They're debating more so, well, what are our solutions? What are our options? What can we do? And so in terms of getting people's attention, I think it's more so empowering people of what is it that they can do. I think people want to take action, but they're not quite sure where to start, and they're not quite sure how as an individual they can make a difference. And so I think that's the number one thing we need to do is sort of teach folks how to organize, because organizing is the way to win. And I love the last panel because it was talking about the science, and I love talking about the science, but the science is mainly understood. It's the action that's not happening. It's the action behind the science. You can know all the science in the world. Knowledge is power only if you apply it. And I think that for the work that I do and the things that I'm most proud of is trying to show folks how they can apply the science so that they can actually have that tangible future. Learning about the causes of their sargassum. I have personally experienced, my mom's side is from the Caribbean, Trinidad, Jamaica, and St. Vincent, and I have personally witnessed the sargassum that was not there a few years ago. I first saw it in 2019 on a cruise in the Caribbean with my family, and I was like, what is this? And one of the folks who worked on the ship was like, oh, that's sargassum, and explained it to me, and I was like, what? And now I went back to a place recently, a few years ago, that I had been going to in Tobago, growing up, and it was everywhere. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm thinking, at my age, I can remember when it didn't exist in the same way. So I think that seeing the changes and then saying, okay, but what are we going to do about it? But yeah, I'm mostly proud of just being able to be in this movement and being able to help just work with so many great people who are really changing the world.
Okay, is this working? Okay, great. Yeah. Awesome. But hi, everyone. My name is Isaias Hernandez, and I'm an environmentalist and also media creative behind the platform Queer Brown Vegan. So just a little bit about me. I don't know if the presentation's coming up or not. Okay, great, it is. So just to kind of get started is I didn't really have like a very clear trajectory in my environmental journey. So growing up as first generation Mexican-American, my parents came from Mexico, and, I grew up in poverty my entire life. So like for me, understanding around environmentalism was often seen as a space for those who are rich or who have these like heavy science backgrounds. So when you think about an environmentalist, you often think about amazing individuals like David Attenborough, Jane Goodall, Rachel Carson, But if I asked you to name 5 Black environmentalists, 5 Indigenous environmentalists, 5 Asian environmentalists, 5 Latino environmentalists, a lot of people are just like, they just kind of freeze up because it is. I think that's something where it really affected the ways of how I saw, climate education in media. So to kind of get more into the journey into what I do today is after graduating from UC Berkeley with environmental science, I kind of recognized that I wanted to go into the intersections between media, research, and education. I actually had a very unfortunate experience after graduating college. I could not get an environmental job. And it was honestly one of the most heartbreaking things for me because I thought myself as like a failure of like, I did everything that I thought I could, went to one of the best schools, went to the environmental programs, did research, got my name published with some of the academic professors. And I was just like, I can't get a job at an environmental NGO. And so one of the hardest things I heard from the interviews when I was younger was that you don't have any good climate work documented. And in my life, I participated a lot in activism, did a lot of grassroots things, but never really documented or put myself online. I thought that as like a dangerous thing to do, or you don't want to center yourself. You should put your story out there because it's not relevant. And so when I graduated, I actually ended up working in the fashion industry for 2 years, lived in New York. And, my friends and even my coworkers would be like, why are you working here if you have no fashion experience? And I said, well, I actually am creative, but, I think there's a marriage between environmentalism and fashion, like sustainable fashion, for example. But one of the things I recognized that when I was working is that I had this passion to teach people. My mom is an educator. She taught me how to write and speak in Spanish very fluently. And I always had this care to like teach people and recognize that it took me years to kind of be comfortable with calling myself an environmentalist, even though I never saw that within myself. And, one of the things, I don't know if, it's working. One of the things I realized is that, like, how do we really tell stories? And so one day I was on the subway in New York and my friend was like, why don't you just create like a internet account? And I was like, that sounds dumb. Like, why would I post things online? And, I was like, no one cares about me. No one would listen. And all my friends were just like, just do it and you don't know what's going to happen. So I created Queer Brown Vegan to really reflect back then in 2019, like my lived experience as someone who also was part of the LGBT community, also that was Latino, and also someone that, lives a plant-based lifestyle. And I was just like, how do I teach younger people to kind of be more acceptive towards themselves after realizing that, like, in academic spaces, I didn't feel comfortable talking about my racial identity, nor even my LGBTQ identity, because a lot of professors would just be like, we don't talk about that in the lab. It was kind of like, okay, I'm just a human, I guess. And so one of the things I realized with climate media today is that we are in ever very politicized times today where climate education is being seen as a threat. Years ago, we talked about critical race theory and intersectionality being attacked by right-wing groups, and now we see that, science as a whole is being attacked. And, that's something where, for me as a scientist, it's also important for me to preserve this type of knowledge. And one of the things I do as an environmental educator is I work at the intersections of, collaboration with organizations, academic institutions, and public schools, K through 12, to kind of provide this accessible resource for people, knowing the fact that everything is being blocked, everything's being censored, or a lot of things just cost money to produce these things. And I felt that independent media is one of the ways. Which, fun fact, 25% of young people today learn about climate issues through social media. So, and then 23% is TVs and films, which suck because, again, we have a problem with the entertainment industry not really trying their best to kind of incorporate climate. And then 30% is traditional media like journalism and everything that you see there. And so one of the things I do in my work today is one of the assets is creating ecological wealth through education and media. So one of my web series actually is called Teaching Climate Together, which really focuses on the intersections of bringing together environmental or scholars and frontline activists or organizers to kind of talk about subjects within the environmental field that are often unexplored or often not really highlighted in the mainstream spaces. And one of the things that I had this idea to do 2 years ago is that, how do we kind of create the Bill 9 for climate science, but make it more culturally relevant for my community. And so I think for me, one of the things I developed is a 6-episodic series with different people to kind of explore different things. And some of them I won't go into too much into, but we explore different ecosystems and some of the things that are happening. So like in the first episode, we talked to a scientist who talks about what's happening in the Monterey Bay in California. We talk about this idea of like what is evidence-based hope? Like it's not just wishful thinking, it's actually rooted in the continued momentum that scientists are actually making. Or episode 3 that talks about critical ecology. How do we talk about slavery in the United States and talk about agriculture that has essentially been damaged due to chattel slavery and due to colonization? And those are really hard subjects that we kind of approach in my platform and the work that I do with scientists, and also just intersectional environmentalism, like Leah Thomas, who is one of my great friends. Like, how do we talk about this idea of an inclusive form of environmental education? But one of the things that I always say is storytelling really matters. It doesn't matter if you don't believe in media, if you don't see yourself in these spaces, but everyone does have a story. Everyone is able to contribute to their cultural landscapes. And just a quick thing, it's just like, these are some of the things that really helped me on that end, but we'll talk more about it on that. So we can go back to the original slides now. Thank you so much.
Amazing, thank you. Sorry, we didn't get the slides memo, so you're just going to have to listen to us ramble for a bit. Hi, everyone. It's so amazing to be here. We're Amy and Ella. We're from the UK, and we are the co-founders of an environmental action charity called Kids Against Plastic. And I think to probably address the really obvious first thing, we're not kids, or at least we're not anymore. But we started our charity back in 2016 when I was 12 and my sister was 10, essentially with this feeling that I think a lot of us have in the room. I mean, it's probably the reason why most of us are here today, that we discovered these very scary, very daunting issues when we were young, and we wanted to do something about it. And we, as young people who were kind of nature lovers, who grew up in the outdoors in the UK, we didn't think this was something that we could turn a blind eye to, but we were also aware that we were very young and there was probably not that much that we could do about this issue, or at least we thought at the time. So our charity began very small, not as a charity, as a tiny youth social action project that our parents supported us with, litter picking in our local area, and since then has grown into an award-winning official charity through which we engage young people internationally on environmental issues, not just plastic pollution, but climate change and these issues more broadly as a whole. And our charity has a few kind of key different dimensions to it. It's about empowerment, it's about education, and it's about, of course, most importantly, action. And Ella will talk a bit more about the work that we do with young people and the CAP Club, as we call it. But I think education is also a really important pillar of our charity. And similarly, we're also daughters of teachers, of state educators, and aside from giving us like a deep need to overachieve, it also gave us an awareness of how the current education system, especially in the UK and pretty much internationally, is really failing in equipping young people with the knowledge of what is happening in the world around them. And we work with kids through our charity. The reason it's still called Kids Against Plastic is because the focus of what we do is with the youngest members of society, kids from 4 years old up to sort of the mid-teens. We often see that we think that kids are too young to know about these problems, and we think that someone who's 8 years old couldn't possibly comprehend what's happening to the world around them. They couldn't possibly understand climate change. But the truth is, kids are aware of this. And all that we do by not properly educating and engaging them in these issues is give them this intense eco-anxiety that they find out about this just from sources online, just from news, and they feel so overwhelmed and they feel like they can't do anything about it. And we're trying to sort of cut that at the source and teach kids more deeply about what's happening, about the problems that climate change is causing to their future and the world around them, but most importantly, show them the avenues through which they can start to make a difference on that. And we start with schools for that, because schools can be a really amazing hub for young people to start to explore their own change-making journey with the support of their classmates and their teachers. So we have the Plastic Clever and Climate Clever Schools programs that we run internationally, which are focused on how we can introduce not just kids, but also the adults around them to these issues in a really manageable way. So not saying in order to do something about these issues, you've got to become completely plastic-free as your first step, or you've got to completely cut all of your emissions down to zero, or you can't do anything about this, because obviously that's just not true. So we try and encourage a smarter way of thinking about plastic pollution and climate change through providing schools and young people with 3 stages that take them from learning about these issues, exploring what the situation is in their school in terms of their plastic waste or their climate emissions, and then how they can take action against that. And when they've started in their school, they can then take that more broadly into their local community and really use it as a starting point to make a big difference in the communities that they live in. And alongside the kind of science, the education side of our charity, we also do a lot of work with young people on how we can build skills through environmental issues as a starting point, because a lot of young people really care about these problems, but especially when you're young, it's quite daunting to stand up in front of your classmates or in front of your teachers or in front of, you know, an audience of people more widely. I mean, it's still scary when you're our age, when you're adults. Like, well, everyone hates public speaking. So how can we teach kids the kind of basics of how they can give a presentation, how they can write a letter, how they can record a video and share it with someone. And we call that the Action Academy. And we produced that last year, which is delivered through our website to help kids go through the different stages of skills development through climate change and plastic pollution as the lens.
Yeah, and I think, like Amy was mentioning, through our projects that we have with schools, we were seeing these young kids in primary ages, or I don't know what the equivalent is here, that always confuses me, but these young children who are so passionate about making a difference and wanting to start that by doing work in their own school, which, like Amy said, is scary because you're putting yourself up to be judged, supported, maybe not supported by your own peers, but we were still seeing these kids want to do that and really striving to take action and leading their teachers, which is always amazing to see. So we wanted to work more with kids one-on-one, and that's why we started our Kids Against Plastic Club. And that was during COVID when, you know, you should be more disconnected than ever maybe, but instead we were building these connections with young kids by having weekly Zoom meetings where they could all join with their parents, with their family, and just have discussions initially about plastic pollution, have games. And we have then developed it into more of a way of developing their own skills as well, because now we're having some kids lead meetings, like the full 45-minute meetings being led by just these kids. We're sat watching now, which is very cool. But yeah, that was so nice to see and build up that community. There's now hundreds of kids from different countries all over the world who are making these connections and discussing this to get out their eco-anxiety and developing their own skills, which is, I would say, the most rewarding and important part of our charity to this day. Even though it started as something for us to do for ourselves to get the anxiety out, it's now turned into the most rewarding thing that we could have done with this project.
Yeah, and just really quickly, just on that, just because I know the last part of the question was around what more needs to be done. One of the other things we do through the CAP Club is uplift youth campaigns. So we currently have 2 ongoing, one of which is the 1 million pickup campaign, which is around logging and collecting 1 million pieces of plastic. We're started by a 10-year-old member in Spain called Ali. We're currently on 900 and something thousand pieces. There's a 24-hour litter pick happening as part of the charity over this weekend, so we should hopefully reach the 1 million goal over this weekend, which is super cool. And we also have, we had a campaign running called CAP TAT, or Kids Against Plastic TAT, which I'm not sure if that's just a phrase used in the UK, but essentially it was around getting UK publishers to stop selling magazines with cheap plastic cover mounts on the front of them, because they were providing kids with a toy that kind of fell apart within literally 5 seconds of use, and was actually producing this really cheap, low-quality plastic waste, which can't be recycled and is produced really unethically. And we ran that campaign for a few years, over the last few years, and eventually got the UK publishers to create a new sustainability roundtable to review the sustainability of their products and what more they can do to engage young people with climate issues. And that was started by, again, a member of our club who was 11 years old at the time she did that, and has now actually resulted in change more widely in the UK in this industry. So I think one of the main things that's our focus around what comes next is not only how can we amplify youth voices, but how can we make sure that they're not just listened to, but actually heard? Like, how can we translate inviting young people to the table into something that's actually tangible and actually makes a difference?
I would like to open the discussion already now, but I was asked to give you as guests a little bit an insight of Rutgers. And so, in fact, I think I can speak to all professors from Rutgers. What is reuniting us, we dearly, deeply love our students. We have fantastic students. Also, we are a school with one of the most diverse student bodies as a public school in the United States. it's a school that has not backed down on diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm so proud of that. So we did not. We feel really like safe in that. Let's hope it continues. We are not like bought, like sold to science, and then, you know, the humanities and arts go down. And I've been asked by Rebecca to talk about the AIR Collaborative, the Arts Integration Research Collaborative. AIR also means we only do stuff outside. Inside sucks, we think, you know. And so basically, I co-founded this with a dancer. It's a cross-school initiative, also cross campuses of Rutgers. And our first big event was the March to Rutgers Gardens in 2021. We had 150 people on the ground, students, faculty, performances, dance, storytelling, a little bit in the way that you said. And what was the goal? So we have wonderful resources. We have Rutgers Gardens, 100 acres of, you know, our own a botanical garden, but it's cut off with 2 highways. You can only get there by car. It's ridiculous. It could be 20 minutes walk, but you can't get there. You cannot bike there, nothing. So this is like was our first, target in a way, you could say, with really good results. We then filled the teams, had a lot of support from our executive dean. I won't steal her fire, but there will be solutions for access to Rutgers Gardens that she might want to announce herself. So that's really great. We really love to work with Douglas Residential College. They were our first supporters together with Mason Gross School of the Arts. Wonderful young women. We work on establishing Girl Track chapters, college chapters across Rutgers campuses. Girl Track, for those who don't know, it's a wonderful organization, the biggest public health movement bringing Black girls and women to walk. So it's really a health movement, but it's also a community organizing movement. We have done really good progress in that. We have the college representative connected with us. Out of this are coming research initiatives, Black Bodies, Black Health. We really try to stop this extractive research where you basically use the communities for your results, but you are not paying back enough. That's also about the New Brunswick community. So AIR Collaborative acts really very locally within Rutgers and within the Hispanic community of New Brunswick. We have built down the road a pilot garden for people with disabilities, trying to apply principles of universal design, catering to the veteran community and the disability community, but also children. And just to say, circling back to the students, so we have created many multidisciplinary research opportunities, new curricula, and within the past 5 years, I counted, we had about 400 students involved in about 30 courses. You see, it's a really big team, also teaching, and we are most proud of, these concerted efforts that have been kicked off. And maybe the last thing for myself, I teach a seminar on walking for 5 years, the power of walking and listening. And I'm really, this semester I have these amazing students, and what I try to teach them is, or we learn together how to feel more alive every day, how to cherish the small things, and also how to be resilient in this really difficult time of, crisis that we are. Good. So thank you so much. And Amillia asked me to open the panel discussion. I go back from being a contributor to a moderator now. So basically, we really want to focus in this panel on this intergenerational collaboration. I'm the oldest. I even have a hearing aid, so I can really start the conversation off. So I would like to ask you first, Natalie, and then Ella and Amy and Ty and Isaias later. So how can a collaboration between youth and adults become successful? What is the added value for the movement? And where do you have to be cautious? And maybe, Natalie, because not everyone knows that you are behind we're one of this week of action and the 25 marches around the world, and you created Greta Thunberg. We really need to hear the story now. Please give it away for us.
Okay,
but also to tell us really, what do we have to be cautious? What are the value of this collaboration, and what is the cautiousness you have to be against, especially the adults?
Oh, okay. So I know it's a thorough question. I want to see. So, I'll tell that story of how Greta came to be, I guess. So I think, in terms of what I have found from being, just in the climate movement, I have my bachelor's is in environmental science and policy, master's in a similar thing, sustainability. And what I have found is that we all want the same things, but we all come from different perspectives. We have different generations, we have different experiences. And what I found is that your experience growing up at the time that you did, with the technology that you had, and just the way the world was there, is one of the main determining factors of how you approach this work, or how you approach everything, right? How you approach life. And if you don't have all the different puzzle pieces in the room, you're not going to get the full picture. And so I'm a, older millennial, right? And I grew up before smartphones had been invented, before social media was around. And so there's just a certain way I am viewing the world and interacting with it. But what I've learned now from working, this is not high enough, from working with Gen Z, is that their perspectives are necessary, but it's also still incomplete. And so from the kind of creation of the youth movement, if you only have very, very young people, sometimes you can have a lot of ideas, but not a lot of the follow-through implementation. And so what I have found is the actual best solution is intergenerational organizing, not organizing where everyone is in, like a traditional large environmental org where everyone's going to be a bit older. That also has a certain style, a certain way of doing things that is also going to be limited. And so I think the best solution to get the results that we all want is to work together, knowing that we know what we know, but we also don't know what we know. And so in terms of some of the work I've done, in 0 Hour, I was recruited into 0 Hour to be an adult mentor January 26, 2018. And I was asked to put on, there was a week of action we did in 2018, July 19th through 21st, where we did a lobby day, and then we had an arts and music festival the next day in a park, and then we did 25 marches around the world simultaneously. So we had a march in Nairobi, Kenya. We had a march in London, a march in New York. Our main march in the U.S. was in D.C., and just watching these young folks, high schools, the youngest founder was 14, two of the other founders were 15, and the oldest founder was 17. And they just had these ideas. They're like, we're just going to do a complete world takeover of youth marches all at once. And the motivation behind it was one of the main founders, first founder Jamie, was suffering from wildfire smoke in Seattle. A lot of smoke was happening from the Canadian wildfires in 2017. At the same time, in June of 2017, Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement. And so simultaneously, she couldn't see, as far as like the trees outside, you couldn't really see them. That distance you couldn't see, it was smoke. You couldn't go outside, you had to keep your doors closed, your windows closed, and it was the beginning of summer. And imagine you're just finished your freshman year of high school, you're ready to start your summer, and you can't. And friends of hers were being hospitalized with respiratory problems because of the constant smoke. This was lasting for months. And so it got so frustrating that she was like, we can't trust the politicians. She couldn't vote, right? You imagine you're 15 years old, you can't vote yet. You can't participate in politics in the way traditionally. And so she just had an idea and was like, youth have to do something. We need to do a march on Washington. And she wrote a piece of paper, said, Youth March on Washington, took a picture of it, stuck it in a window, and took a picture and put it on Instagram. And she said, Youth March on Washington, who's with me? And then a young person on the other side of the country in Maryland, Nadia, saw it and DM'd her on Instagram and said, I'm with you. And they were like, okay, cool. And then a month later, Jamie was at a conference, it's a summer training program thing at Princeton. It's like a summer program for kids. And there were two other kids, and she told them the idea. She's like, I think we need to all unite together and just do a giant march on Washington. And they were like, yeah, me too, let's join. So the four of them, total strangers, none of them knew each other. Just two met on Instagram. The other two met, just in person on a conference. They said, let's do this. So they start planning it in that summer, 2017. And I, met Jamie at PowerShift Network annual meeting, which I was my first day on the board. My first day on the board of that conference, which I started my youth organizing in PowerShift, which at the time was called Energy Action Coalition before then. And so now, years later, I'm on the board, and it's like full circle. And she told me the idea, and she asked if I could put on the lobby day. And I said, yeah, of course. Why not? Help out. And as the marches were being planned, there was a march planned for Stockholm in Sweden. And so there was a kid, Greta, who was working on that march. And then she decided, actually, I'm going to do my own sister action. So our march was July 21st, 2018. And so she was like, I'm going to do a sister action a month later. I'm going to sit outside of Parliament with holding a sign and saying, striking for the climate on Friday. And so she did it 1 week, and then she wrote us a message and was like, hi, I'm Greta. I want to skip school every Friday for the climate. And she was like, I really got inspired. I really love what y'all did. You know, I was working on the Stockholm March briefly, but I want to really be involved. And like, you know, you guys showed me that like young people can really make a difference. And so I never remember this leadership team meeting, and I was like, what do you mean she wants y'all to skip school on Fridays? I was like, you guys are all like magnet kids and IB programs. Y'all are going to fail out of school. And they were like, yeah, I don't think my mom would let me like skip school every Friday. I was like, well, write her back. Like, this is really cool that she's doing this, you know, support her. And so they set up a Zoom and stuff. And I was like, yeah, it sounds like, you know, it's fun. And then anyway, that became the entire climate strikes movement. And I was just like, wow, that's really fun. Like, I didn't know that was going to happen. It was just fun to watch happen. And so in terms of the idea, you know, that one person can make a difference is that you can have one idea and you can let it grow. And then you can talk, you can just post it out on the internet. Like, just say, hey, everyone, what do y'all think of this? And you can find other like-minded people who want to join you, and you can literally change the world. And to me, watching that, and I was like, wow, like this is the power the internet has. Oh my gosh. Like imagine if millennials, if we had smartphones and like Instagram, because it hadn't been invented yet. And so I was like, this is amazing that people can work together all over the world and inspire people for action, and then organizing, and then it changes. And so I think that, I mean, that was the story that I was telling last night. We were eating dinner, and I was like, you know, the funny story of how Greta came to be, it's because of 0 Hour. I was like, origin story of Greta Thunberg. But in the end, it's like, you know, it has changed the world in terms of all our work. And what it's shown me is that if everyone does work together with the same goal across, you know, oceans and across experience levels, you can do so much. And in terms of what an older person can especially learn from younger folks, you know, working with youth activists has taught me so much. One of the things it taught me is fundraising. I did not know how to write grants. One of the founders of 0 Hour, Madeline too, when she was 16, taught me grant writing. I was like, what? She had learned it from somebody. She was like, yeah, I'll teach it to you, and you know, you can be on the finance team now. And I was like, thank you. I'll be your mentor on the finance team. And, you know, so you can learn so much from young people. And the way that you know, I think sometimes a lot of times young folks are working with older folks and they get scared that the older person is going to take over. Now, yes, I have seen that happen. I have personally watched it. And I'm like, ooh, this is not going to work. Because the thing is, you cannot control young people at all. There is no point in trying. You can guide, you can advise, you can give your opinion. May not be followed, but you can say it. It may not be heard, but you should never, ever, ever be like, you just can't control it. And so I think what it is, it's like trying to control a chemical reaction, right? It's like, no, just let it be. But you should like say, you know what we could do? Maybe such and such. And eventually folks will be like, oh, okay, this actually is helpful. And so I think the trick is to be a part of the team, but don't lead it. I think the thing that has really helped 0 Hour is that it truly has always been like a youth-led org. The decision makers were always young folks. The directors were always the ones they actually had a rule in the org where adults could advise, but they weren't allowed to vote. So you could literally give your opinion, but you had no power. And that was a really smart model because it made it so that you couldn't take it over. You couldn't overpower it. You had to just let it flow and see where it went. And
Thank
so I
you
think,
so much.
yeah, I think that's the best way, definitely.
So Amy and Ella, we have only 15 minutes for the entire. So do you want to say like an intergenerational experience, or what you think is the value in it and what could be a danger? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think at this point, it's undeniable pretty much that the value that young people bring to the table in these kind of conversations, because not only are they developing these skills at such a young age, but they're also just showing a passion and an urgency that a lot of adults, especially world leaders, aren't showing. And that is so important and key, especially when it comes to these kind of issues that we are on a small time frame for, and we do need to start working together pretty much immediately. And I think the thing that we need to be careful of when it comes to these intergenerational collaborations is, like you said, not trying to control young people's voices, because with these conversations, with the amount of anxiety and worry that young people have when it comes to these topics, when they're being told to kind of slow down or be quiet by adults, who don't understand the importance of how acting quickly when, you know, this is young people's lives that they're going to grow up to live and inherit this planet from the older generations. I think being told to take a back seat is something that doesn't go down well, and it shouldn't go down well. It really shouldn't, because we need to all be part of these conversations to develop and build the world that we want to see in the future, and we want our future kids to see in the future as well. So I would definitely say these interactions between generations are so key, but they are very fragile, and it is all about making sure you're not using young people as a token when it comes to greenwashing to show that your company is being so forward-thinking and really including everyone. It can't be just for those reasons. It has to be genuinely listening, but also understanding young people and what they're saying, like you touched on earlier. If you want to.
Yeah, and I think, just quickly, I think we also have this sometimes strange view of young people where we see Gen Z as like an entity, like, oh, we're going to engage Gen Z with this issue. And I doubt if we put all the millennials or all the Gen Xers in the room, or, and tried to get you to agree on one issue, politicians can't do it. Why do we expect all of Gen Z to have one view on one issue? That's never going to... I am doing my final year of climate science at the moment, and in one of my classes, we have to vote on what we think is, the future of this, or what's the solution we agree on, and no one agrees. And that's in one issue, in one class, in one college. So how do we expect all of Gen Z to have the same view on something? So when we include young people in conversations, we also have to have a diversity in the views of young people that we invite, because you're not going to just get one person speaking for the whole of a generation.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on what Natalie said about the climate strikes and drawing it back to a little bit of Rutgers history. But the climate strikes happened here and were led by Rutgers Students for Environmental Awareness, which I'm co-president of and have. If you're in Students for Environmental Awareness, raise your hand. Oh. Yep. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes. It lives on. It's an organization we're the largest and oldest environmental organization here at Rutgers, and those strikes actually created the Rutgers Office for Climate Action, which now oversees all 3 campuses, including Camden, Newark, and New Brunswick. Yeah. So it's, yes, serious, I know. But I want to draw in Isaiah into this conversation as well, especially going back with the importance of media and the role that media can play in connecting people. You have very impressive and creative media skills, and I was just really interested in how you developed them, and if you had any advice for young activists who are interested in using media to connect with others or to express themselves creatively.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think young people are extremely talented. I'm a 90s kid myself, so I'm in between the I was raised by millennial siblings, but I'm in my late 20s, so entering that new phase soon. But I think with young people, when you're an undergrad, I feel like you're always underestimated, whether that's through your colleagues, whether that's through the research labs, whether that's through your professors. I remember in my early days, in undergrad, having this idea of how do I communicate environment with social media and art? How does that exist? And I remember I would tell my professor, and my professor was like, that's not a feasible career, Isaiah. I don't know why you're asking me that question. And I was just and it's a different generational thing where it's I couldn't be mad at him because I understood where he was trying to come from, but the way maybe his response wasn't as nice as it could be. But I think one of the things that young people always feel judgment of is within our own friends. The first project I created before Queer, Brown, and Vegan, it was an environmental magazine account with my best friend in college, and it was called Alluvia, and it's still up there, but it was an environmental storytelling where we just highlighted environmentalists of color and their relationship to the environment. And I remember very clearly, I had a friend that was the same age as me, and she was just that's going to cost money to produce a magazine. How are you going to finance it? How are you going to do all these things? And it was almost as if I felt so discouraged by my friend because I was how can you be my friend and telling me all these things? But it's maybe I'm not delusional, but maybe there's things that, I can prepare for. But regardless of that, I think that, through that project, it taught me how to write. It taught me how to develop ethical storytelling and also develop this community. And we had a launch party for our magazine. We fundraised $1,500 through our community of friends. It was all grassroots, but that allowed me to understand the power of storytelling And the number one thing I tell with young people is like, you don't need to do like social media exactly what I'm doing. You could do editorials, you can do, you know, poetry, you can do music. There's so much different avenues. And, you know, one of the things like I've said is that you just never know who's going to read your work. Like, because of myself writing this magazine, then going into my own blog, that's how I met my literary agent in order to write a book. Like, these are all the things that you just don't know that existed out there. And I think that young people today, especially Gen Z, like, you are going through the non-traditional routes of establishing your careers, your accomplishments that don't look the same as they did for those in their 80s, in the 90s, in the early 2000s. And that is okay, but it's never not okay to feel like you're alone in this. And I think a lot of young people that reach out to me always have the same thing, is that by the time they're a junior or senior, they're like, I keep getting asked what I'm going to do after college. I don't know what I really want to do. And I think that's okay not to know, but it's never not okay to not believe yourself that you're going to end up okay. And I know that it's something that's so hard to hear. And I remember being a young person too, and someone telling me, you're going to make it far in life. And I'm like, I'm an unemployed. Like, I don't even have a job. Like, I was at graduation. I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing with my life. But okay, like, I'll believe in you. So again, you just don't know where that hidden power comes from.
That's an experience I totally share. I think my first decent paycheck, I was 40. So don't be too worried about that. But a really quick follow-up question, because you are in this environmental literacy and teaching to the older educators of Rutgers. What would be your recommendation to our present here?
Oof, yeah, I mean,
Teaching.
I think for teaching is never stop asking questions, but also creating your own. I don't know if they have this where undergrads can teach their own classes, but they're called decals at Berkeley, where undergrads get to teach their own climate
We do have that.
education. Yeah, they have it.
Yeah.
You all should do that, definitely. And I would just say too, like, if you don't see a curriculum being covered within a class, ask your professor if they're willing to add it. I know that, like, you know, sometimes undergrads message me, they're like, my professor's using your video on, you know, solar punk or like ecofeminism, for example. Like, that's a video that's been out there, and a lot of professors always reach out and they love using it as an introductory starter point to get their students involved. So, and if you don't see something online, just create it and, you know, distribute it and locally, internationally, you know, anywhere.
Excellent. So we have, I think, 5 to 10 more minutes. The second round of the panel, I would just, you know, start. We have, so I find that a lot of teachings really for environmental justice movement came from queer theory. And so, I was very inspired by some scholars who also pointed about how problematic it was. Like in one example there was an environmental action to clear up the Gouverneurs Canal, where a white girl was throwing white lilies into the dark waters. And, you know, it's so problematic about the whole picture of white is pure and we have to clean it. And especially in the context, also what means natural. It's an extremely contentious word in general. So we were really thinking a lot about this also with students. And one of the times when I cried, many times I cried in the last 2 months, was when actually the Environmental Justice Unit of EPA, so EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency, was dismantled, because this literally means death to so many lives here, and it's especially black and brown lives and bodies, because we know that there are disproportional numbers near polluted Superfund sites. And so my question would be to both, like, where do you see like the possibility of queer theory, but also of this movement bringing this forward to especially protecting the black and brown communities? And it also goes to you in the UK. I don't know where the situation is there, but I would be happy, and whoever wants to answer first, I would be happy. But I feel there's really there's a huge potential coming, especially also from queer theory, into the environmental movement that hasn't been fully embraced, I have the feeling.
I'll just go really quickly just from that end. So I think with our governmental political world, I just attended a summit last week with environmental nonprofits, executive directors, and foundations. And it was honestly genuinely scary. As you all know, who knows that Greenpeace is being sued right now? about the case. It's the biggest green NGO. So privately, in a conversation I had with some of the people there, the court subpoenaed their Signal messages, and Signal is an app that's used as a private app that you can't do it, but they subpoenaed it. Yeah. So so be careful on that end. But from a legal sense, which also inspired me to be like, I think I need to go to environmental law school now, because there's not really a good option right now. But I would say that from the queer theory perspective, and I'm just going to tie in queer ecology, and simple definition for queer ecology, very intro, is basically the ways that we see the world as natural versus unnatural. So it's not about gay penguins and gay dolphins, and that's cool to see the queer relationships that they have. But queer ecology, in my view, is just to recognizing the ways that we have seen these communities as unnatural, or like my identity as an unnatural part of the environment. Now, how that connects to environmental justice is that many LGBTQ, and many people who are homeless, a large portion of them are LGBTQ. Now, a lot of those LGBTQ communities often live in environments that are typically low-income areas where there's exposed to high amounts of environmental hazards. Now, that also can connect back to the ways that affects their medicine, chest binders for people who wear chest binders. So all of this is really related back to like bodily health, like public health, environmental health. You could see that. But I would say that, when it comes to the larger, broader conversation of what environmental justice looks like from the governmental lens, I do think that it is a very scary time that we are living in. And I know that, we as an institution and as people, as someone that's independent, like we have to be more louder than ever as possible, but also work like with organizations to amplify that mission. So, but yeah.
Cool. So say, what's happening with the EPA is, oh my goodness. I mean, dissolving all the environmental justice offices across the country. I mean, it's an overt attack. It's an attack. It is, the South shall rise again. It has. It is just the Confederacy that never disappeared in this country rising again, and trying to, take over, which is what we're seeing across for the entire administration. I think it's just, it's a person who on the last panel talked about, essentially what's happening with climate change is colonization of the atmosphere. And I am happy that folks are starting to really think about that as this isn't just a science of, carbon emissions is coming from this. No, it's capitalism. It's capitalism that has taken over the world, that has become completely out of control, and that it's sort of like, everyone grab what you can before it's gone. And that's what we're seeing right now, with oligarchs trying to snatch up every single resource before it's gone. And the thing is, oligarchs believe in climate change. They really do. Mark Zuckerberg is building a huge bunker in Hawaii that costs $250 million. It's a high-rise underground. And so he's building an underground highway. I mean, not highway, high-rise, I'm sorry. Underground high-rise. And so when you think about, they know what's happening. If they didn't, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. And so I think for us, it's sort of, if we have a complete paradigm shift, mind shift of what is our purpose here on Earth, we cannot live past our limits. And I think that, everything happening with Trump and the EPA, and I even hate saying his name because I don't like bringing him into the atmosphere, is that it has been happening for hundreds of years. I think the only difference is that we have now reached the limits of our world, especially with our technologies, that we have having such a disproportionate impact. In terms of Black and brown communities, I think folks now are waking up to say, wait, what has been happening to Black and brown people in this country and around the world for centuries, now the majority of the U.S., in terms of white folks, are feeling it now. And that now that you can't ignore it, it's gotten so bad that you can't hide it, that now it's sort of this emergency crisis. But this crisis has been happening this whole time. It's just been hidden. I think for, the best thing we can do is build that solidarity. People always say it's never been left or right. It's always been up or down in terms of like class solidarity. And I think that for us, looking at this beautiful, diverse room of people, is we're doing it right now. Building that solidarity for our, in terms of our across class, across gender, across everything, to ensure that we are fighting for our own survival. And I think the best thing is that breaking down those barriers is just saying we are fighting for our own survival on this planet. And whether you're Black, brown, white, doesn't matter, you're still breathing the same air. And to get rid of the sort of divisive things that have been put on us in order to keep us apart so that we don't fight up. And I'm happy to see now that, at least with all the mess happening now in this country, folks are finally waking up. People are like, wait a minute, it's always been like, they're taking my Social Security, what? And now suddenly folks care. And I think that the good, at least one good thing that could come out of this horrible situation that we're in is if it actually sparks that action that changes the world for people finally to rise up and essentially overthrow capitalism. That's what I'm working to do.
Yeah, I'm aware we're really short on time, and I also have to say, speaking from a UK perspective, how incredibly privileged we are to be in this situation where we're one of the few governments last year who moved slightly more left-wing, and we have a government who recognises that climate change is a problem and are trying to do something about it. But the network we work with is completely international. We have kids engaged in, I think it's over 15 countries now. And what happens in nations that have so much sway on the world also means that the actions that are taken on the environment have so much impact on people outside of the US as well. And we've got kids in Australia and Nigeria, even in sort of European countries, who are very vulnerable to these issues. And it is scary for them as young people, especially when you've got someone with so much power who's doing so much damage through it. But I think for us, that's really emphasized the importance of creating safe spaces for people to still feel like they can talk about this. And even when so much is going into dismantling any conversations around this, how can we encourage them, but in a space that's safe for people and they feel like they can be honest and, express how they really feel. And with kids, that's something we have to do because obviously we've got so much safeguarding around working with young people, and most of what we do is behind, kind of closed doors. It's not on a public platform, but actually that really creates a chance for those kids to just be completely honest with each other and have these conversations, and I think that's so important.
Yeah, that's very important. So we kept the time well, so we have 15 minutes for you for the Q&A because we have these wonderful people. So we will do it, Amillia and me, we will go around. Take your microphone, Amillia, or the other one. Okay, we serve different parts of the room. I will serve this part, and Amillia is serving the other. Who has a question? Yeah, Megan.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the inspiring words. I think when we're talking about youth activism, one of the things I think of, even in my IWL experience, is you want to do everything, right? Like you want to do the protests, and you want to learn the science and the engineering, and you want to go to every conference in the whole world. And I'm interested in how you all, 10 and 12, found your thing, even in the environmental movement. And what was that process for you? And has it changed, or do you want it to change for really everyone, but especially you guys knowing it so young? How has that changed over time, and how have you kept that kind of focus in your activism?
Yeah, I think in some ways being so young was almost quite lucky, because I think when you become, when you grow up and you learn more about these issues, I think we typically often see that there's almost this box of sustainability that you need to fit into. And there's a way to be an activist, or there's a way to be an environmentalist, and it's one that's science-based, or it's one that, involves protest. And that's absolutely true for some people, but obviously that's not the case for everyone. And so much of the, I think, superpower of the climate movement is so many people doing amazing ways of communicating this issue in a way that's not just science-based, or is not just around a form of protest. And I think for us, when we were so young, it was through the lens of just oh my God, that's a seal that's got plastic around it. Or there's obviously the infamous turtle video, which I think people kind of saw a lot when plastic pollution as an issue was becoming well known. It was the turtle with a straw up its nose. And for us as young people, that was kind of just our motivation in just going, oh my God, this is terrible, we need to do something about this. And we found the only method we could to do something about it, because we were so young, which was just fit it into our lives as they were. Because, since then we've been at school, we've been at college. So much of it is around fitting it around what you're passionate about and what you do. And I think that's how we've continued to have it as part of our lives, because we've not seen it as our life and then sustainability. We've seen it as how they can really mesh together. And I'm lucky for me that science is my passion, and I do really enjoy campaigning. But for Ella, that's not her path. That's not what she's interested in. But because it's so intrinsically linked to what we do, we don't feel like we have to change how we live to fit this. It's how can we fit it into our everyday lives, and that really allows it to be something that I think has longevity because of that.
Yeah, I would also say that if we ever are giving advice to young people on how to get started at a young age, we always say about the importance of starting small. So no matter how small or obscure your passion might be, if you find it, then do something about it, no matter how big or small your action is. Because especially in issues as big as, environmentalism and climate change, everyone has something that really they're passionate about and sticks out to them. And I think as long as everyone is acting on those, there's going to be so many campaigns happening that cover pretty much the whole of the environmental issues. And you can't do that all by yourself. Like, you want to, but it's something that just an individual feasibly can't do. And that's why it's so important that, as many people as possible get involved, because without that, then, you are going to sit there and look at everything happening all over the world and want to be involved, but not everyone can be. So that's why, it's taking these small steps and not doubting that, a small campaign on a small part of a massive issue, you can't doubt that it's still going to make a difference, because it will. And that's something very important to remember for young people.
Yeah, I had a question or two. Thank you also. I'll thank each and every panelist throughout the day for being here, for your time, your knowledge. I had a question for Isaiah and the Meek sisters. And you too, Natalie, you can contribute if you've encountered any young adults that come to mind. How do you find the motivation to keep going and advancing your personal passions and value for environmentalism if and when you receive negative feedback? Like, I was listening to you, Isaiah, talk about your friend and your professor who unfortunately were not being cheerleaders and they were being critics, which I'm sorry about too. Like, that's never cool. So how do you find the motivation to keep going? Yeah, when you get that negative input and negative feedback.
I mean, I think we did have a few negative experiences during school when we were growing up. And it was especially because, I won't get into the whole story, but we joined our school at the same time that Capricins were banned because they weren't recyclable, which never goes down well with school kids. We can tell you that much, because we didn't even do it. But it was a bit of a coincidence that we joined at the same time. And I think we had a lot of negative feedback for the campaign, but it wasn't necessarily because people didn't believe in doing something good for the environment. And I think that's something that is very key when you are seeing young people battle with these issues, because it's not because they don't care, it's just that they don't understand the way you're going about it necessarily. So we had people that didn't agree with what we did, just our campaign in general, really. And a few years later, one of them became one of my close friends, and they were just saying, yeah, I don't know why I was saying that. Like, what you do is pretty cool. So I think this negative feedback can, it can really get to you if you overthink it too much. But as long as you know what you are doing is important, and that thousands of people all over the world agree with you, especially the younger generation, it's really important to just not let it get you down and carry on, because never in a few years' time they might come up to you and say that they agree. You never know. People change their minds as well. So
yeah, I think there's so many cultural norms to break around activism as well, because especially when you're in school, if you do anything that's like unusual or different, or even if you're a person who is different, you stand out. And school kids aren't known for being the nicest, right? And that was obviously the experience we had. But I think that's why perseverance, like Ella said, is so important. And I think that's why also working with the next generation is something that we're so passionate about, because if we can instill a different values, different ideas of other people in them from a young age, and really encourage this idea of being different and doing something you care about, then we can try and hopefully solve that a bit earlier. And also, they provide so much inspiration for us. And being on those 45-minute Saturday morning calls is kind of the highlight of my week most of the time, because you have like an 8-year-old child who goes, I want to spend 5 minutes talking to you about this one like species that lives near where I live in this country. And to see that passion and that willingness to actually care about something is something we don't often see widely, and I think that's massively motivational for me.
Yeah, I love that question. I think honestly, like, young people are always underestimated, yes. and it's hard. And I think the issue with our generation is that we have a comparison culture issue, and I think it's very evident. Like, even like my friends, like I told my best friend from college, like I feel so behind in my life because I want to have kids, and she's like, Isaiah, I feel behind because I just had my kid and I had to put my career away for a few years. And it's like this thing where it's like you don't always recognize like those things. But I would say, like, for me, like, I'm really glad I created social media at 23. Like, I meet such amazing youth climate activists that are kids. and I think they have different timelines, as much as I think I had a different timeline to enter this space where my relationship with social media was healthy, where it's like I know how to remove myself online, and also I know that like if someone truly has a concern about me, they can call me, and if they just want to kind of beat around the bush, to me it's not worth my time anymore. And I think that like when you're younger, we put so much attention to these things, so we're like, oh my god, like, you know, this person that I respected, and I also think that like, you know, showing up for yourself of like, you know, who I am publicly is a facet of me. It's a identity of me, but also who I am inside at home personally is a different person. That's sacred to me too, and it's just the same person I am like outward. But like I would say like for young people, like I think being underestimated is the greatest gift that you can be given. Because I think my entire life I was not the 4.0 student, the one that was getting these accolades. I was the student that was told like, you're failing and I don't know if you're gonna make it. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm really gonna make it. And like it was always that thing, I think that testament for myself to be like, I want to also not just think about my narrative, but the narrative of where the system has failed the people. Like I'm seen as like, you did it and you worked hard, but I'm like, what about the person who's working 10x harder than me, but because of their color of their skin, their you know, the ways that society judges us on our looks, our abilities, like what about them? They just deserve the same amount as resources that I do. And that to me is where I feel like younger people can have more authentic discussions about that.
Yeah, so I think that at least in my experience lately, a lot of people that I've met have felt a lost sense of like agency and hope with the current administration. So I'm curious if any of you have kind of run into that with kids in your respective organizations, and if you found ways to like keep motivation in there or explain to them ways that they can still help in this political climate.
I guess I'll say that one. Oh man, motivation. I would say the longer you do this, the harder it gets, because, you know, I have seen changes in myself just from 20 years ago. I remember what I was thinking when I was 19 and I was in school learning about these issues. And I was like, oh, okay, peak oil is going to hit soon. We got to do this, this, and this. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've devoted my life to this. Has anything changed? Has anything? In fact, you know, we've passed 1.5 degrees. We're at 1.65 now. And so for me personally, it's just being in it for a while. This sort of like, is this worth it? Like sometimes I have moments where I'm like, oh, this is so stupid. I should just get rich or die trying, like, you know, capitalism, whatever. Because I'm like, what's the point? It's all dying. But then I remember, I'm like, the only thing that keeps me going is sort of essentially, what is the alternative? The alternative is giving up. The alternative is accepting a dead planet. The alternative is saying goodbye to everything that has ever made you happy. Which for me is just the woods, the beach, everything else, coral reefs. I really love coral reefs. And that's not the alternative. The alternative is so much worse. The alternative is certain death, essentially losing. And the other option is trying. That's the only other thing. And so I think for me is that what keeps me motivated is the fight. I can't just sit back and watch. I have to be active. And if I'm sitting there for too long not doing something, I get sad. And so watching the current administration, just the way the country's been going in the world, is I was thinking to myself last night, I was like, the number one thing we have to have is hope, because hope gives you the belief that you can do it. And if you don't have the belief that you can do it, you won't. You know, if you believe you can, you believe you can't, you're right. And so I think for me is that just believing that we, not I, right, we can do it is the only thing that keeps me going. And every time I get a little sad about it, I just remember it's not just me alone. It's a beautiful community of folks all over the world working together. And if we actually all work together, we can make it happen.
I just wanted to ask, kind of bouncing off of the idea of perseverance and having that passion as you pursue your journey, I feel like there's a very big feeling, and it can depend on like person to person and like how they were brought up and stuff, but I feel like especially for me, there's a very big feeling of adults telling kids that they need to do something in order to make something happen. Like you need to get a degree first to like start an organization, or you need to focus on your school before like making any real impact. So, and I feel like I've been seeing that a lot with my friends as well, who've been having the same kinds of emotions. So I just wanted to ask, what would you advise youth to sort of respond to as a response to that, and sort of how can youth and what sorts of skills and actions do they need to take in order to make adults and sort of the people in power listen?
I think the best way to prove them wrong is by showing them. And I think a really big part of that is finding your community, because you don't have to start an organization. And like we're, sat up here having all started doing our own things, but that's not the route you have to go down. And actually getting involved in the community and helping with actions in your local area is a first step. It doesn't have to be something big as your immediate action. Just starting small is, like Ella said earlier, a really important place to start. But I think also engaging in the dialogue that we're at a point now where we can't wait. And I think that's particularly evident with the kids we work with, because, for example, someone who's 10 years old, if they were to wait until they had a degree or until they were in a position of power in an organization or a company to do something about this, we'd be minimum 15 years down the line. And, we've had a lot about 2030, and that's 5 years now. So we're not in a situation where we can wait. And I think engaging in that dialogue is I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of young people feel like that. So I think engaging in that first, and then finding your community and your place to start, and not letting someone who doubts you be the one that dictates where you go.